The Pope comes out with his new Evangelii Gaudium, the joy of the gospel. I'm sure I'm mangling his Latin, but I actually had 2 years of Latin. It's pretty straightforward language. Anyhow, he says that, quote, the earnings of a minority are growing exponentially, so too is the gap separating the majority from the prosperity enjoyed by those happy few. He calls for more politicians who are genuinely disturbed by the state of society, the people, and the lives of the poor, and for a commitment of political and financial leaders to ensure that all citizens have dignified work, education, and health care. Sounds like FDR, right? Make the government the employer of last resort. He says, our economic systems will devour everything which stands in the way of increased profits. Whatever is fragile, like the environment, is defenseless before the interests of a deified market. The commandment, thou shalt not kill, today we also have to say, thou shalt not, to an economy of exclusion and inequality. Such an economy kills. How can it be that it is not a news item when an elderly homeless person dies of exposure, but it is a news item when a stock market loses 2 points? Pope Francis. I'm seriously thinking of becoming Catholic. I'm telling you. Peter Schiff is on the line with us, conservative libertarian financial advisor, host and author of the Peter Schiff Radio Show. Schiff Radio, that's with 2 Fs. SchiffRadio.com is the website. Peter, welcome.
Yes.
So, what would, at least in the mind of Pope Francis, what would Jesus do to the banksters?
Well, you know that old joke about, I don't know, maybe it's just an expression, does a pope, what in the woods? Maybe we could change it to, well, actually, it would be the opposite. Does the Pope not understand economics? Or, I don't know, maybe it's not the right thing.
I think you're mixing up bears and popes.
Yeah, or Pope, whatever it is. Yeah, Pope, is the Pope Catholic? Yeah, well, whatever it is. But he doesn't understand anything.
Well, I think this Pope is Catholic, and I think he's calling for an economic system worldwide that comports with the Gospels.
Well, what really does is free market capitalism. And if the Pope understood economics, and even if he read even in the Bible, I'm not going to quote chapter and verse, but what lifts people out of poverty is capitalism, is freedom, not government. All the societies where government has tried to eradicate poverty has gone up, including here in America, where we declared
that's
war
simply
on
not true.
In the 1960s, and poverty won.
That's simply not true. When Lyndon Johnson did his Great Society, the poverty rate in the United States was cut in half over a 5-year period. And Franklin Roosevelt put people to work and said the government is going to be the employer of last resort. He cut the unemployment rate in the United States from almost 30% down to 14% in less than 5 years.
We didn't eradicate poverty. In fact, if you go back to the Statue of Liberty, right, when we were asking the world or beckoning the poor people from around the world to come to America, poor people left Europe to come to America, even though we had no welfare programs, no food stamps, no socialized health care. We gave the poor people of the world nothing except freedom and opportunity.
We had an amazing amount of land and free resources that we had stolen from Indians who had occupied it for 20,000 years, Peter.
No, we had an absence of government. We had capitalism.
No, what we had was a vast continent of natural resources that, unlike Europe, which had already been staked out by Europeans, that was easily stolen from the people who had been living on it for 20,000 years. That's what we had.
No, we had freedom. We had
freedom to kill Indians.
Regulation. That's what unleashed it. There was plenty of land. I mean, look, you don't tell me there was Russia. The Soviet Union was the breadbasket of Europe. I mean, there's plenty of land over there. I mean, what we had here was limited government. That's what made America thrive. Not the fact that we have resources. Look at all the resources in Africa. Africa's got a ton of resources. Why didn't they thrive? It's because of the limited.
I would suggest you read King Leopold's Ghost, Peter. I would suggest you educate yourself about the history of colonialism in Africa if you want to ask that question anything other than rhetorically. There actually are specific answers for that. I've worked in Africa. I was in Uganda during the war with Idi Amin. I've been in Darfur. I've been in South Sudan. I've been in Kenya. I've spent a lot of time in Africa, and I can tell you, the echoes of colonial rule in Africa are just as real as the echoes of 400 years of slavery and 100 years of apartheid in the United States.
Look at places like Hong Kong or Singapore, countries that had no natural resources whatsoever, but their standard of living skyrocketed because they have freedom.
Not for the poor. Have you been to Hong Kong?
No. Yeah. No,
have you been to Hong Kong, Peter?
Yes.
Have you walked through the slums?
There are more poor people in America. Do you have any idea how many poor people are in America right now?
There's a mind-boggling number of people in the slums in Hong Kong. Hong Kong, Singapore and the United States are the two most unequal countries in the world among the OECD countries. We are the two countries that have the greatest gap between the rich and the poor and the smallest middle class relative to that gap between the rich and the poor. And it's because of this free market capitalism that you're preaching.
No, we don't have free market capitalism. If we did, we wouldn't have that big gap. We have anything but free market capitalism in America.
So tell me how this is going to work. How is this going to work, Peter? Back in the 1790s, you had John Rockefeller, back when we had free market capitalism, colluding with the railroads to refuse to carry his competitors' products. So he was running his competitors out of business, and he was building.
Maybe the 1890s, not the 1790s.
Yeah, 1890s. Thank you. And he was colluding with the railroads to refuse to carry his competitors' oil products and kerosene to market.
No. John D. Rockefeller did more to eradicate poverty than John Roosevelt and all these do-gooders. I mean, what he did was bring down the cost of energy, the cost of kerosene, gas.
And in the process, he put hundreds of small business people, thousands of small business people out of work and created a mind-boggling fortune for himself.
All of his customers benefited. All these so-called robber barons, the guys that pioneered American industry, what they did is they brought down costs of production. They passed on the lower costs.
But they weren't doing it in anything that resembles a free market, Peter.
Yes,
they were doing it. They were doing it in a way that was crony capitalism, collusion.
What we have is crony capitalism now. You had some of their competitors who could not compete.
Give me one example of one industry that you would change and how you would change it so it becomes, quote, free market.
Oh, almost all of them.
No, just give me one example. Let's make this real. Give me one example of one industry that you would change so that it is, quote, free market, end quote. How would you change it? What's the industry?
Okay, we'll start with housing. Okay, get the government out of housing. Get rid of Fannie Mae. Get rid of Freddie Mac. So there's no more.
Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are already largely gotten rid of.
No, they're not. They're guaranteeing all the mortgages. Get rid of the FHA. Get the government out of the housing market. Get the government out of the health care market. Get rid of Medicare, Medicaid, Obamacare, all kinds of government.
So to hell with poor people, basically, and to hell with anybody who wants to.
With poor people. Poor people had better access to medical care before the government got involved. Health care was a lot less expensive before the government ran up the price in the 1960s. Nobody in this country. My father, grew up in the 1930s. He had 7 or 8 kids, brothers. His parents were immigrants. They were, his dad was a carpenter. Nobody ever worried about health care because
Peter,
doctors were cheap.
I remember the 1960s and 1970s. I was doing business in Michigan in the 1970s, which was an extension of the 1930s, the Roosevelt laws that said it was a felony. It was against the law in every state in the union to run a health insurance company on a for-profit basis. That all changed with the Reagan Revolution in the 80s, and if you look at a graph, you will see that's when the price of health care exploded, when the profit motive came into health care.
Profits are what keep prices low. It's not the other way around.
Nope.
Where you have profits you have low prices.
Then how is it that Stephen Hemsley makes over $1 billion as the CEO of United Healthcare?
Because he must look. Well, healthcare is not a.
It's because he's a parasite. He's a bankster.
Right now that the government's not in, but profits keep prices low because
profits don't keep prices low. Competition keeps prices low.
Right, but you have to have a profit to stay in business.
No, you don't. You can have competition in a nonprofit market. We did for 50 years in the United States.